All right, welcome back to Bowl Like a Leopard. We are coming to you with a little bit of a limited time frame right now. So if you haven't signed up already, I am going to be putting out this newsletter probably once weekly at the most, called Razor Sharp News Chronicle. It says Razor Sharp Reports here, but it should come out as Razor Sharp News Chronicle. So those will be my articles and some of my videos and products from my t-shirt store. You can also find my videos if you're getting sick of YouTube and the censorship on BitChute. Of course, this is a Turley video because I was just watching one of his videos on Rumble, which isn't quite at the level as BitChute or Odyssey, or at Odyssey, which I personally think is the best, but choose whichever one and go for it. Today the topic is going to be how to really put into perspective the legal maneuvers that are going through the court system concerning the 2020 election, and why I believe it's pretty important for President Trump and his campaign to litigate it to the end and try to pursue as many of the goals as they can, even if one of those goals, which is the main goal, overturning the results of some of these state ballots for the presidency and winning some electoral votes, even if that isn't accomplished, it's still vitally important that he accomplish the main goal, or the overall goal, the one that's a little bit bigger, of trying to get some electoral integrity through the legal system, getting a lot of these fake ballots thrown out, getting some of these processes that are clearly not secure to be invalidated, and force these states to really stick to electoral security and not to gloss it over. Those are some of the main issues. Now, the other issue, which for some of you it might be too late to really convince that it is important, and it may not be as important as the previous issue that I was talking about. This is the other issue is Congress. Now, this isn't a full map of the 2020 election, but you can actually see some of these seats were considered toss-ups for this election, including Montana's seat, inexplicably. And for some reason, they were saying, oh, Montana's at-large seat could flip Democrat, which of course didn't happen. In fact, the only two seats that did flip Democrat ended up being in North Carolina, which I find a little worrying. But in fact, the Democrats lost some seats in states like New York and California and Iowa, which I guess might be a little bit more believable. They lost the seat in Minnesota, which was supposedly going to be, a safe seat, and it flipped to the Republicans, a very, very significant seat because it was controlled by a blue dog Democrat. And the reason that I'm trying to connect these two issues is because, and this is something that is not exactly a cut and dry issue, but by overturning the results, or I should say, it's not just overturning the results, it's throwing out ballots that would be illegal under proper electoral procedure. The Democrat hope of establishing a one-party government for the next 2 years at least, which could end up seeing a lot of these mandates, whether it is the lockdowns, whether it is more gun control, whether it is expanding abortion to late term, whether it is pushing through new statehood for Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., or packing the Supreme Court. All of those mandates, all of those ideas would go up in smoke because, in just one example, if a lot of these votes were thrown out in Georgia, at least one of the Senate races that has gone out over to runoff, which would be the one between David Perdue and Jon Ossoff, would probably have the runoff canceled. The other one, I am not quite sure, the one between Raphael Warnock and Kelly Loeffler, but it is also possible that Warnock would go from being in second place to being in third place, because enough of the ballots that are thrown out would be from Metro Atlanta counties, Cobb, DeKalb, and Fulton. So what we're seeing today, this is what's on the screen, and it's only from BizPack Review, so I want to just make it clear that this is the only source I have for it. I don't know what else is going to happen, but apparently the GOP legislature in Pennsylvania might actually seize back the power to appoint electors for the Electoral College. That would also be a major step, but it's not really the only issue. What has to happen, so just understand, there are 3 states that would basically, if Biden was to lose them, whether the votes are thrown out or whether they're flipped, they would basically prevent him from taking the White House entirely. And those states are Georgia, Pennsylvania, and then possibly Nevada, Michigan, or Wisconsin. And at the moment, it seems like Pennsylvania is definitely on the brink. I think Georgia would be the next state that could be on the brink of flipping if it is going to happen. There's no guarantee it is going to happen, because some of it's dependent on the court, some of it's dependent on how ballsy these state legislatures are going to be. And we have to
need to make sure you
basically, sorry about that. Basically, we have to ensure that people don't expect too much, because it could be that one state flips and the others don't. It could be that, I mean, a lot of different things could happen. But if, for example, a lot of these ballots get thrown out in Georgia, like I said, those Senate runoffs could be basically eliminated. So you would end up having the runoff being a moot point in Georgia, because the second runoff would be between 2 Republicans. That's possible. Or if just the first runoff between Perdue and Loeffler was to be eliminated, then the GOP already has a 51-seat majority, and the Democrats have less of an incentive to pursue the second seat. Not that they won't try. Obviously, they'll look for any excuse to raise money from donors and, dickwag about how important the election is and how big of a symbol it would be for one of the, whoever it is, whether it's Ossoff or Warnock, to get into the Senate, which, once again, to the Senate, I'm sorry to tell you, if you're a progressive watching this, they're no longer working for you. They're working for them. And that's the way all these people are. Including, by the way, I mean, I'm not trying to sell this as something that's necessarily great if the Republicans have a Senate majority, because Mitch McConnell is looking out for Mitch McConnell's interests. There's already talk of a bipartisan coalition to get some sort of pathway to citizenship for illegal aliens and things like that. So I'm not trying to sell you on this as being some sort of antidote for whatever awful policies that a new Biden administration would bring in if he was able to survive all of these challenges and get into the presidency. You still don't really have anyone you can trust as far as the people who are in Congress and in the White House. Another issue that I'd like to bring up is that there are a number of seats in Pennsylvania and Michigan that are basically going to be, very important. Those could be overturned. In Michigan especially, if a lot of these ballots are thrown out, there's the 8th district where Alyssa Slotkin is currently, it's apparently, so she won by 4 points. If a lot of those ballots get thrown out, because there are court cases that are before that they're already before the Michigan Supreme Court concerning fraudulent ballots in those districts. If that happens, you have to look out for a couple of those seats potentially flipping to the GOP, because a lot of those ballots will be thrown out, or the results will be invalidated, such that the race would have to be run again. And in the meantime, while the race is run again, it could be that neither of the people who was elected, so to speak, gets to be seated. They have to basically behave like that seat gets vacated until the new election happens. I think that happened in North Carolina a couple years ago. The other person is Haley Stevens. She also won by a narrow margin in Michigan in the 11th district. And that's just in Michigan. The same issue could crop up, by the way, in Western Pennsylvania and that's a district that might be familiar to you. Actually, I don't think, yeah, this is the district, Connor Lamb's district, where he's sitting with Sean Parnell. That one also, it was a landslide for Parnell on election night, and because of the ballot magic that happened afterwards, it flipped. I think like a week later, it flipped back to the Democrats. And this is a district, by the way. I mean, think about it. You can actually see the results. It's a district that Trump won by 2.6%. Romney won by 4.5%. McCain won. It never voted for a Democratic presidential candidate. And to think that, oh, suddenly in 2020 it's going to flip for the Democrats by some sort of logic, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I think that it could easily become a race that ends up getting flipped, or it gets thrown out, and you end up having basically the Democrats having to run another race. It would be basically a special election. Connor Lamb would have to run in the special election. He's a lot more exposed that way. He doesn't have as much latitude to say, oh, I'm here fighting President Trump, right? Because there is no more President Trump. If unfortunately, if President Trump gets knocked out, isn't able to overturn the results of the election. At the same time, if these results get thrown out, you will have a problem for the Democrats in terms of trying to defend those seats should something happen. And by the way, Connor Lamb is filing a separate, or sorry, not Connor Lamb, Sean Parnell is filing a separate lawsuit in order to basically throw out those results. He's going to try to throw out those results that are currently showing Connor Lamb winning. So those are just some of the reasons that those legal maneuvers are basically essential to preventing the Democrats from running the country. Now, let me see. So let me explain a little bit more the election results in the House of Representatives. At the present, you have 222 seats for the Democrats. You have 206 for the Republicans. A number of those losses. By the way, there's going to be at least one seat that joins the Republicans because there is a runoff in Louisiana that is between two Republicans because it's a jungle primary there. There also might be, and this is really bizarre, in Iowa, there's one more seat that they're still counting. They're doing recounts. It could be that seat flips to the Republicans. So at the end of the day, it's possible that the Republicans narrow the Democratic majority to, something like 222 to 210 or it's not really clear. But this is something I want to discuss about really parliamentary procedure. And you have to understand this in the context of how Congress works, how many of these parliaments work. It doesn't, like in Congress, it's actually more extreme than in other countries. But just understand it this way. In order to push a legislative agenda, you first of all have to cobble together a majority. In the US, we typically have a one-party majority in either house of Congress. And in order to really move legislation, you need majorities in both houses. In other countries, for example, in Germany, you cobble together a coalition between a main party that appoints the chancellor and some minor parties that basically get to help write the legislative agenda of the main party. And that's why you have a lot of the problems in German politics where the CDU is like the main party, and then these other parties that are, they'll have a coalition with the Greens, they'll have a coalition with whoever, and essentially the government is elected that represents the political system. It doesn't represent the average citizen. There is no direct representative election the way we have it here. I think it's not quite the way we have it here. I don't think that they have first past the post here in the US. They do have it in England. But in England too, we also, or Britain, I should say, In Britain, you also, in some cases, you have coalitions. Usually there is a one-party majority in Britain, but you see what's happened with the Conservative Party there. It's basically not even representative. They're just as much of a tyrannical lockdown party as the Democrats would be here. And politically, they're almost analogous to the Democratic Party under Obama. But this is what I wanted to get at. In the United States, it's even more extreme, meaning that it's not enough to have a majority. In Germany, yes, if you have a majority in the Bundestag, which is their parliament, you can push through legislation. You can rule with very good authority, as Angela Merkel has for well more than a decade. In the USA, first of all, the legislature is much more separate from the presidency. Unfortunately, the presidency has way too much power. Doesn't matter who the president is, Trump, Obama, Bush, Biden, whoever it is, they just have too much power. And in some cases, that power is devolved to the wrong people, to unelected agencies, whether they're intelligence agencies or regulatory agencies. So the problem for Nancy Pelosi is that she can have a majority, and she does have a majority as of right now. And I don't think that we're going to see the House flip, but it could come very close to being, in the single digits, right? So if the Republicans were to flip some of these seats due to ongoing litigation, which is not out of the realm of possibility, and it's not only in the states in question, which are Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Nevada, and I think I covered all of them. But Georgia, for argument's sake, I don't think Georgia has any House seats in question. But in any case, I think in Iowa they have one. In New York, there's a seat that is blatantly, a case of ballot magic, as I try to call it. What we're talking about here is that the Democrats are right now on the cusp of having a majority that is what I would call a useless majority. And it's a very simple concept. And it's one just based on empirical fact. It's not based on the way Congress is supposed to run. It's the way it is run. Nowadays, when you get elected to Congress as a freshman representative, in the Senate it's much easier. But if you're in the House, you spend a lot of time having to campaign and raise money anyway. So you get elected in order to, and then once you get elected, often you have to try really hard to get reelected. And you see that in the cases of people who are on the center, people like Abigail Spanberger of Virginia. You did see it, by the way, also with some of the people more on the left, people like Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They did have to campaign somewhat hard in their safe districts because the moderate Democrats wanted to unseat them. But in these centrist districts, you have an even more difficult problem because you always have the prospect that you're basically fighting with one hand tied behind your back. While you're in Congress having to show up for these votes, your Republican opponent or your Democratic opponent who doesn't have a position in Congress yet, they can raise money at will. Of course, under existing laws, but they can raise money at will. They can campaign as much as they want. They don't have to fly back and forth to Washington, D.C. They don't have to go to town halls. They can basically play offense the whole time. And you're playing defense for 2 years. So while Nancy Pelosi may have on paper a majority, in practice, she has to, in order to push legislation, have as many people on the floor at all times as possible in order to get a full vote. And if a lot of those members, as is necessary, go back home and have to campaign and have to do fundraisers and have to do all of the real heavy footwork in order to win re-election, then the majority becomes it becomes meaningless because she doesn't have those people there. You could have committees where the Democrats nominally have a majority and they can't even pass legislation out of the committee because on the day in question when they need to take a committee vote, they have on paper 13 people, but in reality maybe 7 show up. And therefore the legislative agenda doesn't really go anywhere. Like you would have Jerry Nadler, if you remember, is just an absolute joke of a politician. If he's on the Judiciary Committee and he wants to put forward a bill that one of his committee members wanted to push through, and he, the Republicans have more people there, they just say, no, we'll vote it down. It's not going to get past committee. Also, another issue that they might have to think about, the centrist members of these committee might be like, this one I'm just going to vote against. Why? Because I don't want to get voted out, right? Because I got elected because I'm pretending to be independent. Now I have to actually pretend to be independent, not just on the campaign trail. I have to do it at my actual job, and that's really a problem. And that's one of the problems with the way Congress is run, which is that a majority doesn't necessarily mean a mandate. So effectively, Nancy Pelosi's she can claim victory because she's remains Speaker of the House, but in practice, this is worse than losing. This is almost like winning a preseason game in the NFL and losing your starting quarterback, or having some sort of catastrophic injury, or having all manner of disaster happen. That's really the problem that she has on her hands, that she's basically got no engine in the car right now. And by litigating these electoral lawsuits, Donald Trump can make it even harder for her, assuming, of course, that the House Republicans with Kevin McCarthy at the helm, that they're really interested in making life hell for the Democrats. And believe me, if they really want to, they can. If you are an effective opposition leader, all you have to do, and this goes for Mitch McConnell. If it looks like right now he could be Senate Majority Leader. Depends what happens in Georgia. Never count your eggs before they hatch. But Mitch McConnell will have disproportionate power. He can basically go in front of cameras all the time if he wants to, and if he wants this to be the way it works, and say, hey, Joe Biden, if you want to get anything done, you give me what I want, and then maybe I'll think about giving you something you want. And I don't really need anything from you. That's basically what Mitch McConnell can do. And the same thing with Kevin McCarthy. He can start basically making demands, and that's one of the things that the Democrats have had a problem with, is that they're not very good in some cases in actually getting any accomplishments from their legislative agenda, because they don't necessarily care. They care about getting elected. They care about getting that sweet donor cash. They care about doing fundraisers. They care about all that stuff. The Republicans, it's not to say the Republicans have been a great success in the legislature, but given the amount of media support and given the amount of activist support and corporate support that the Democrats have, they've just been an utter catastrophe. And I think that there's evidence of this in the groundswell of people who have been telling them, we're going to try to vote you out in primaries and things like that. That's why they have to do, in many cases, some of these like insane shenanigans, like they did with Bernie Sanders, both in 2016 and 2020. Whether it is leaking the questions to the Hillary Clinton campaign through Donna Brazil, whether it was the it's in the rearview mirror, but what happened in Iowa with that mysterious counting issue, which keeps apparently it could have been a dry run, right? So I just want to say that I think it's a terrible time for the country. It's a terrible time to be growing up. We have many people who don't see a future in terms of employment. They have a very scary health crisis on their hands. So it's not easy to find a silver lining in the political system, and you're going to have to temper your expectations. But you can still learn something about it, and you can still find ways to really see what's happening, read between the lines, and figure out exactly how this government works as opposed to the way they tell you it works. That's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. And I want to remind you again, subscribe to the newsletter. You can check out the Etsy shop for all of your joke t-shirt ideas. By the way, if you have jokes that you want to be put on t-shirts, feel free to send me the idea. You can find my email. It's I think it's already in the description, but it's chefleopardyt@gmail.com. You can also find me on Rumble, on BitChute, and on Odyssey. And have a great weekend, and God bless.